So today, I wanted to continue to read some more of Genesis and dissect more of the issues that I have when reading this book and taking it at face value. I'm going to start off with just reading some of the text, and I'll skip some portions and comment on those that are interesting. I'm going to be reading Genesis chapter 2 and 3 today. So starting off in Genesis 2:4. This is the history of the heavens and the earth. When they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So, if you remember correctly, we just had an entire order of creation in Genesis 1, and we had plants get made on day 3, which was prior to the creation of man. Here, we're seeing that this is happening before any plant of the field was in the earth. So, it seems they already forgot their order. Or, as more scholars are pointing out these days, Genesis is likely a compilation of stories, which are being mixed together a bit here and there, and thus it makes sense that the order's a bit jumbled, because these are myths and legends of a people which have been passed around for hundreds of years. Back to the text. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Skipping a bit here because it's just talking about the location some more. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may eat freely, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Alright, so God made a garden, he put the man in it, and he put in it the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and at this point we don't know much other than that. I won't comment on the details of this tree just yet, but note that God does indeed say in no uncertain terms, In the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. So God has, for some unknown reason, put an instant death tree in his garden. And the Lord God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper. It seems incredible that God would make a male and female of thousands of species and then make a male human and be like, yeah, this is just going to be by itself and be unable to reproduce. He didn't think to make a woman in the first place. It's just a weird nonsense afterthought. What a strange thing for an all knowing God to do, particularly a God who knows all of the past and all of the present. He knows he's going to make the female. He just decides to wait for no particular reason. This doesn't sound much like an all powerful, all knowing God. There's not much else that happens in this chapter. Let's move on to chapter 3, where most of the fun happens. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made, and he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. I'm going to skip a lot of the conversation here because it's fairly simple. The woman eats, she shares with Adam, God isn't happy. Let's move on to God's response to all of this. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Then to Adam he said, Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put his hand out and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden. So we have the fall of man as it's commonly known, but let's look more closely at what happened. Remember, when God placed the tree, he said, "In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." The serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So who told the truth, and who lied? Well, they didn't die that day. They did die eventually, but this seems to have been hundreds of years later. And remember, we're taking a literal reading of this, where we just treated the days of creation as literal days, as many creationists do to this day. Obviously, when God is talking to a human and says, "The day you eat of it, you will die," that's what he means, no? Anything else would just be plain deceptive. What about what the serpent said? "You will not surely die." This seems to have been true. The eating of the tree was not directly related to their eventual death. Did they become like God, knowing good and evil? Let's read again what God said. "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil." And he follows this up with concern that the man will eat from the tree of life and continue to live forever. So apparently, the thing keeping Adam and Eve from ever dying is the tree of life, and this knowledge of good and evil seems to have made them too much like the gods. In other words, God lied about everything. He lied to them about the tree of knowledge of good and evil because he was afraid of what would happen if they ate from it and continued to live forever. Only 3 chapters in, and we're already finding out that God seems to miss some obvious things and that he's a liar. But what else is going on here? God has done several other things that most of us would consider highly unethical. He lists punishment for the behavior of Adam and Eve, and not only will it affect them, but it's going to affect every other living creature. So let's go through this list. Man will rule over woman. So he creates inequality from the sexes right from the start. "In pain you shall bring forth children." He creates needless suffering right from the start. The ground is cursed and doesn't grow things as well. This ultimately leads to famine and starvation around the world and results in the death of countless of millions through the brutal suffering of starvation. He creates bad things like thorns and thistles, again, just to cause needless suffering. Meanwhile, your average human would say, "Oh yeah, if I had the ability to reduce suffering of people by doing something as simple as making births not painful, of course I would do that." But not God. He did that on purpose, and he did it out of spite. Not only is punishment for crimes you did not commit an unjust act, the way in which he punishes is senseless, and most people today would recognize it as needless cruelty. For example, when I punish my children, I don't just say, "Hey kid, I'm going to make the entire rest of your life miserable because you disobeyed me." Why? Well, for one, it's an overreaction to anything my child could possibly have done. It's a child, and I'm trying to teach them a lesson. My goal is to punish so as to reinforce good behavior and de-incentivize bad behavior, not to make him suffer. In other words, the punishment I give is intended to correct future behavior. It's not meant to be retribution. But what God does here is simply vindictive retribution. But it's worse than that. They had not even eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and thus they were like infants who didn't even know right from wrong. How could they have possibly understood the weight of their actions when they didn't know good and evil? In summary, Genesis 2 and 3 are the story of how God created people who he set up for failure. He lied to those people, and then he got angry and punished them and all of humanity forever. If you have a way to make any of this make sense without just saying none of it actually means the things that it says, let me hear it in the comments.